This demonstration is all about the AWS CloudShell. We've discussed the relevance of using the AWS CLI as well as AWS tools for PowerShell because it gives you a command line option for deploying and managing your AWS resources. You can even put those statements in scripts, invoke the scripts, and do that kind of thing. But we can also work with the AWS CLI directly through the AWS Management Console. We've seen how we can download and install the CLI on the Windows and Linux platforms. But what about just using it here because it's already ready to go? Let's explore that a little bit. So here in the AWS Management Console, I have a CloudShell icon over to the right of my search field up at the top of the web page. And of course, if I hover over it, it says CloudShell. I'm going to click to launch that. So it's starting a new session for me. So the AWS CLI then is available in CloudShell. It tells me right away, try these commands to get started, such as AWS help, which you can also do in the exact same manner if you've got the CLI installed on a local Windows or Linux VM or a physical machine. It doesn't matter, local or in the cloud, makes no difference at all. If the CLI is installed, then it always behaves the same. Now, what you want to make sure, of course, is that you are running the latest version. But here, we don't have control over that. We're really kind of in a Linux bash shell here. If I were to run AWS version, it returns AWS CLI version 2.7.16. It also returns the versions of the Python stack and the Linux kernel and so on. But unlike an EC2 instance or an on-premises virtual machine or physical server, here we don't have full control. Now, what's interesting too is we have a configuration icon, a gear or a cog in the upper right. We can click it to set some preferences like the size of the font, how we want to work with this here in CloudShell, the CloudShell theme, be it light or dark, that type of thing. We can also click the Actions button, and we have a number of different ways to have multiple CloudShell prompts at the same time. If I were to choose New Tab, it opens up a new tab at the top, so we can flip back and forth between them if we want to keep one open for reference, or maybe we have something that takes a long time to run. I can click the X to close those. But I can also go to Actions and view it in a different way. If I choose Split into Rows, well, like it says, it gives us two different rows of CloudShell instances that we can work with. So we can view them on the screen at the same time. We can also view that in column format by going to Actions, Split into Columns. And as you might guess, we then get columns left and right. Both of them are visible on the screen at the same time. From the Actions button, we can also upload files. What you can do is you can select on-premises files on your local computer and bring them into CloudShell. So if I were to choose Select File, I could select some sample files that I want to upload, which I'm going to do here. I have a little status where I can track the progress. It looks like it uploaded my file, which is called project.a.txt, and it tells me it's in the CloudShell user home directory. Okay, I'll click the X to close that notification. If I type pwd for print working directory, that's a standard Unix or Linux command. We are in the CloudShell user home directory. Therefore, if I type ls for list, there's the project A file. Of course, you might have noticed from the Actions button right above the upload file option, we have a download file option. If we click that, we can specify the path for the file that we want to download, such as in our CloudShell user home directory, and then bring it down to our local machine. And finally, under Actions, you can also restart CloudShell. Now, why would you do that? If it's misbehaving, if it doesn't seem to be responding or working correctly, you can choose to restart it to see if that will fix the problem. In the same way, if things don't seem to be working right, or if you just want to start fresh, you can delete the AWS CloudShell home directory contents. Now, what you don't have to do in the CLI here through CloudShell is authenticate, because you're already authenticated when you start this instance of the CloudShell session. So if I were to clear screen, and if I were to run AWS S3 API just to list S3 buckets, there's no particular reason I'm picking on S3 other than to prove that we are signed into the account. And I'll query it just for the name of each bucket. When I press enter, it works. We have the names of the buckets. So we're already authenticated. We don't have to run the AWS configure command as we would if we had manually installed the CLI on Windows or Linux, or if we were running an Amazon Linux image. It's already authenticated here for us. Now, bear in mind, this is for CloudShell, not AWS tools for PowerShell. So if I were to type clear and try to run something like get-ec2 instance, which is a valid PowerShell commandlet, it says command not found. However, what I can do to switch to PowerShell is I can type PWSH. And notice that our command prompt now has a PS in front of it, which indicates that we are in PowerShell. Now, you would do this if you wanted to be able to work with the PowerShell Windows command prompt type of environment as opposed to a bash shell. So the way environment variables are treated, for example. And notice that in PowerShell, I can issue the CLS command in lowercase and in uppercase, and it works fine. If I go back to bash, and if I were to type clear the screen in uppercase, it doesn't like it, although lowercase clear works, and CLS isn't recognized because that's a Windows command, not a Linux command. Let's go back into PowerShell for a second, PWSH. If I were to try to run a PowerShell command related to managing AWS, such as get-ec2 instance, notice it doesn't know what I'm talking about. So just because we have PowerShell available here, that's just the shell environment. The PowerShell tools are not here by default.